And we're back, taking this into the next step of this process here. So we just finished up building our data model for Work Center Management. And now we want to get something in front of our end user. So we have to build some user interface using our screen designer. First things first, we're going to go and take a look at what we already have in the latest version of our MES application for Work Center Management. So this is the user interface here that we have. We have a form filter on the left-hand side of our screen with what we call select inputs that we can use for filtering data in the table that we have here in the middle. So just like we saw earlier in the very first video, all of those features and functions that are out of the box with the table are still here. I can hit search and see that I have nothing in my San Francisco area. If we select Boston, we also have nothing there. So that's very exciting. So the filters, I tend to use these, and I don't want to apply filters to the filters, which we'll talk about, because I want the user to be able to find any data in the system, whether it's active, inactive, etc. Right? So there's kind of a difference as far as applying filters on top of these select inputs versus a filter that would be, for example, when I'm creating a new work center, I would definitely want to have some type of filter on work center group where it's only showing me the usable work center groups, right? So definitely a difference when you're thinking about how to build this application for users and kind of making it feel robust. We want to make sure that we think about that from a creation as well as an update standpoint. Right. We also want to make sure that, like you can see here along the top, I have a details tab. I have history, where used, and production runs. These are disabled. I can't select them because there would be no data there to show me because I haven't created the work center yet. So all of these things are important to remember. Here's my list of work centers that I've already created in the system. I have 28 work centers. I have a column that shows the image for the work center. We have the code that we've talked about, the area or facility. I see most of these are in NSL 01. So if we filter on NSL 01 and hit search, right? So you can see that, the filters do work. We have concurrency. Again, we're not going to talk specifically about the functionality of the Work Center Management in our MES. The point of this is to talk about how I can build create a Work Center Management application for myself, or at least have enough knowledge of maybe what we have here in this one out of the box that if you wanted to go and extend or change anything, you certainly could. Here's what I mentioned before, where we have external IDs pointing to an ERP system. In this case, this is likely NetSuite, and you can see that these are just a 4-digit integer value. If we go and look at our items or infuse what we call products, you're also going to see that, flip over to that screen, that's going to be product management. And there should be an external ID in here as well. So let's see what we get. There's going to be a lot of products in here, 722. Not a lot, but definitely more than work centers. So see in the external ID field, we also have 1001, 1002. So, the danger here is that it's very possible for me to end up with the same ID on a product that I have on a work center that I have on an employee. And that's just not the way we would go about designing a complex solution like MES, right? So just something to think about as you're going through this, and that gets back to the whole concept of sequences and all that kind of thing. So just bear that in mind as you're going through. You want to make sure that things are built for scale and reliability. So, and that's an example of non-scalable and not very reliable. So we have our work center group, we have our shift group we talked about, right? So pretty basic here. A table, like I said, I added an image here. I've got a pop-up. I've got the ability to edit this record pretty easily. And now when I'm editing a record, the history, where used, and production runs tabs are available for me, right? So I have to dig into this. So we're going to go look at what's wrong with our filter here. It says the facility ID was not defined, right? So, these are the types of things that we want to look at when we're building these applications to make sure that if I'm relying on some piece of data that the end user has to provide, that I'm forcing them to enter that piece of data, or I'm defaulting that data, right? Or I'm using one of those transforms that we talked about previously to create that data, so that when you get downstream in your application, you don't have issues like this where you're missing something. So same here, where it appears that we're missing the facility ID, right? So we're trying to filter some data based on the facility ID, and it's not able to find it. So we're going to dig into why that happens to be here as we get into this application. So let's go back to our screen designer. I'm in a pinch and I just want to get something out there to my user really quick. Or let's say I, as an administrator, there's some information or some data that I need to be able to manipulate, and I can't find a place in Fuse to manipulate it. Maybe it's a type or a status, because typically we would hide those tables because they're used in flows that we've developed and we don't really want anyone changing anything, right? That could potentially, be harmful to the application. But let's say for whatever reason, I'm super smart and I'm the admin and I need to be able to add a status to my inventory status table, right? Just need down and dirty real quick. And I'm not huge on, the API Explorer. I'm not huge on that because, I just prefer to not have to write code, right? I can create a mutation, and also, we should talk about that real quick. There's differences, like a query is going to pull data from the system. A mutation is going to be used to create, update, or delete data in the system, right? And a transform can kind of combine these concepts together. A transform could query data, it could create, update, delete data, and it can also perform things to the data. And the data could be at rest in our database. It could be in motion, moving through a data flow. So maybe I have data that's coming into a data flow from the shop floor, and I want to transform that data. I want to add context to that data, right? And after I've added the context, then I'm going to push that into a mutation that's going to then store that in my Fuse historian, right? So all of these concepts kind of work together, but understanding the terminology can be a bit tricky. But again, this is where, we use general standard terminology. So if I go and say, what is a mutation? We don't want a DNA mutation, right, in software. So this is going to tell me exactly what a mutation is, right? So this is why, we took a direction of making sure that the Fuse platform was open. You can do anything you need to do with the platform, but also we use standard language and terminology that you can go, again, on Stack Overflow or GitHub or wherever you want to go. But this tells you exactly what a mutation is. It gives you an example of a mutation, not exactly what, ours would be, right? We could also get even more specific because we know that Fuse uses graphical query language, right? So what is a GraphQL mutation? So now we can get even more specific, right? And we can even go, oh, wait, here we go. GraphQL actually has some relevant information about, mutations and how mutations work, right? So it's easy to find help and support. And as you look at even these examples, you're going to find parallels, right, to what you see in Fuse. So you can apply pretty much any of these best practices and help documents to what you're seeing in the Fuse system. So I wanted to point that out. The differences: mutation, transformation, query, 3 different use cases, 3 different applications, but it's easy to find help. Let's say that I did want to build a mutation because I want to do something special, right? So like I want to maybe create a series of mutations. I've had to do this before where I want to create a product and I don't necessarily want to manually create the product strategy, and I don't want to create the process, right? So if I'm creating a product and it's an inventory item, every product in our MES has to have a strategy. It has to be active, it has to be validated, and every product needs to have, or should have, I should say, a primary strategy. And every strategy needs to have a process, right? Whether it's an inventory item, an assembly, it has to have a process. An inventory item that I do nothing more than purchase it and receive it needs to have a receive process on it, because our inventory model requires that we associate it to a process. So, if you build the application or you tailor the application, then maybe your version of that doesn't require a process. Ours does. So I can come in here and I can pick a base model to get started with a mutation. Now, this doesn't have a ton to do with building a screen, although you may, in some cases, want to build a mutation. My example is that I want to build a screen where the user is adding a new product to the system, and just by defining some basic elements of the product, I'm automatically then going to create the strategy and I'm going to add a process to it. And we'll have an example of this that I'll actually bring up and show you how that looks. So you can daisy chain these things together so that the user only has to enter one thing, but behind the scenes, you're actually creating multiple things for the user, making, their quality of life much better, right? So we can go create a product mutation. What type of mutation? Do I want to create data, update existing data? Do I want to upsert, which means it's going to look to see if this thing already exists. If it does, it's going to update it. If it doesn't, it's going to create it. Or do I want to delete? Upserts are really fun. So I like those in many cases, especially when I'm building a UI where I want to have a single form that allows me to create or update information. Then I would use an upsert. If I want to create a form that does only create, then I would just do a create mutation. If I want to create a separate form, a completely separate table form that does an update, then I would just use an update mutation. But the upsert is really nice because it gives me that ability to really simplify my application development and have one form that does both. So moving back through this says, are you sure you want to replace that? Sure, because this is just basic data and that'll come back. So here's the start of my mutation, right? So it's going to basically walk you through the whole process. So what you need to do now is probably start with, your payload, right? So I know up here that I'm going to have a payload. So if I define that payload, and then I'm going to, it's going to be I need a where statement, right? So you'll learn more about this. But anyway, you have these help pop-ups here, which are going to walk you through the whole process. Real quickly here, while we're here, let's do a query so you can see how that might work. And then you'll see why I'm doing this when we go over to the screen designer. So, okay, so we're working on the Work Center model. So let's pick the Work Center model, and I want to query, I want to get the code, and I want to get some of these other things, right? So I'll just pick a few, hit save, pop that over there. So it just wrote the query for me, right, in GraphQL. So you could use an AI tool of your choice, ChatGPT, whatever, right? You can use any of that. You can go online. You can use our query builder. There's many ways to get to this point. We can also come in here and say I want to do Work Center. So here you can, here's all the queries that these are all the APIs that are already in the system for everything where Work Center happens to be part of the API. So let's look at what happens. If I run this, I'm going to get back all of my work centers. Okay, so this is all the work centers. I can see the code, the concurrency, the hourly labor costs, and so on. If I want to add something else, I just did a return, and then I did control space on my keyboard, and now it pops up a list of all the other fields. So I want to add constraint. Now I want to add some like something that's going to have a relation, because I want to see how that's going to work. So let's look at, remember we looked at the shift, right? So I know the shift group is going to have some type of relation. So I add a curly bracket and do control space, and now I'm going to add the name. I'll add, employee cycle. We'll add work center site. Let's do control space, so it helps me here. Resource cycle, control space, is it usable? If I know these off the top of my head, it's obviously a little bit easier. Let's add another related table. And this is the work center model. So let's see what might make sense. How about facility? Because work centers should be linked to a facility. So we'll get the code. I want to know if the facility is active, and I want the address. The significance of this is that in most systems, this query would probably be broken down into at least 3 separate APIs. One, you would essentially have to pull in what you would end up getting in your initial query would be all of your work centers. You'd get these fields, and then you would get the shift group ID. Then you'd have to write a completely separate query where you get all the data where the shift group ID is equal to the shift group ID that came back in the first one. Then you'd have to write a third query, and you'd have to add into your first one the facility ID and do the same thing, right? So then you have 3 separate queries querying each of those data models, bringing back the information to your screen, and you have to stitch it all together. Now you have to join all that stuff together. What we do with our system is using GraphQL, I can now just add this into one central API, and I can run this, and let's see what happens. I'm going to get back in a single query, a single API call. I get back that shift group ID, which is great, but I also get all the details of the shift group, right? So I can even go a bit further, and I happen to know that a shift group has shifts, right? So if I do that, now I can go to edges, node, add my bracket. Sorry, I always forget the node. And then we're going to go to the shift, and then the order, right? The number, whatever that happens. So you can go down, 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 and you can get all this information, right? In one fell swoop, which makes building an application 7 times faster, 7 to 10 times faster. So we hear from our customers. Now I can save this query, which means I've just created an API in the Fuse platform that I can call either from within Fuse or from outside Fuse. I can execute, I can call the API. I can say, hey, pull back the data for this saved query, and it will spit all of this back for me via REST API in real time and everything. So this is just incredible versus what you'd have to do in any other application. So you can do this across the entire system. You could go even further. I know that Work Center has some kind of connection to work order processes. So if I wanted to get back all of the work order processes that are joined here, right, I would go, or just get a total, right? So say I want all the total number of work order processes, but I also want to go to edges, node. So, these edges nodes are where I'm doing all of my joins. Let's get back the code. We'll get I kind of want the process, right? So I want to get what's the actual process that it's got to add my curlies. Don't forget that. There we go. And then we want the code. And then we'll do the, is it production? All right. So it's not pretty, but I can still run it. So here I can see my lathe work center. I've got information about that. I can see that it's currently linked to a total of 3 work order processes. So I have an aggregation here, and here's the 3. So work order 312, right? Here's my process. Here's another process. So it's linked to 3 processes. It returned all 3 of those in a single query, a single API call. So if you're not a developer, you're a citizen developer, you're an end user, you're a supervisor, you're looking at this, go, wow, it's pretty complicated. This is actually really easy. I am not a developer, but I can come in here and I can get data. So if you ever are curious, how do we get our data out of Fuse? How do we access our data? Well, this is it right here. This is all you have to do. Let's write another query. And let's change my base. We're going to go, let's say I want to get my inventory for whatever reason. I want to get all my inventory out of Fuse. I want to look at it. I want to slice and dice it. I want to give it to my accountant, whatever the use case is. I want to get the quantity. I want the unit. So I want to know the unit of measure. I want to know the status of the inventory. I want to know what type of inventory it is. And so I'm not writing any code here. I want to know what location it's in. I want to know what facility that location belongs to. So that's all good stuff. What product? That's probably helpful. What process, right? You can go through the whole thing. You can see here, work order, tell me what work order it's linked to, and so on and so forth. Maybe you could do some aggregations. Which I won't right now. I want to add the created at last time it was updated. Go ahead and save that. So I've got this whole query that I just wrote just by clicking through, and I can go ahead and run that. And now I've got all my inventory here. I can export this. I can then import this to Excel and have it pivot all this data and turn it into a CSV for me. So this is an extremely powerful tool that you can use, and this is real-time data. So you have access to this, everything you need. You can go as far as you want to grab quality reports. Whatever you want to grab and include here is super simple. So that's enough about the API Explorer, querying and building mutations and yada, 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 right? So we can save this if we want. We can call it from wherever we want to. This is going to be kind of, I wouldn't call it, this is definitely not pro code. It's definitely low code, and it's kind of no code, right? It crosses all 3 because you can do some very advanced things in here without having to actually write any code. I wrote this entire query. I didn't actually write anything. I checked on some boxes and it built it for me, right? So anyone in the business that you want to have access to this, that's going to be able to get data out of Fuse for whatever they need, wherever they need. You can add additional filters in here. So if you only wanted active inventory, or if you only wanted inventory in a certain location, or whatever you want to do, it's simple to do, right? And also because it's very common open language. Again, you can use AI to help you. You could Google, whatever your preference is. I show you this because when we go to build a screen, there are some elements of that involved here. And the power of the schema designer is that it automatically generates all of those APIs, right? So the ability to go in there and build that API is really a function of what we've already created in the schema designer. So let's go in here, and from a simplistic standpoint, again, I'm back to that whole use case of I'm an administrator and I just want to create a table really quick so I can edit some data like a status or a type, right? I could have done that in the API Explorer. I could have written a mutation. I'm too lazy, and I like the visual aspect of a table. So I'm going to click on table, and then we're just going to pick any random status table that we can think of. And you've seen this before. right? Where I'm going to auto generate the screen, and we're going to pick the data model. Yeah, I said status. We'll do a status. We will pick, how about inventory status, because we were just looking at inventory. And in the table and in my forms, I want to see all of these inputs. There's a lot here for whatever reason. Color, external, message, sure. I'm not going to use it as a widget. I'm just going to use this for myself, right? So I don't need links. I do want the action bar. Yeah, filter form. There's not a lot of data in there, so I'm going to skip the filter form and just generate the screen. So now I just have a simple screen with create, add, update, delete, right? So this is back to that use case where I installed the app. I want to manipulate some information in one of these tables. I know which table it is, but I can't find a screen to do it. So I'm just going to save this, my status screen, assign it to a module. It doesn't really matter. Generally, I would leave it inactive, and because I'm not going to let an end user get to this screen, I'm not going to polish it up to the point where I'm going to make it, menu searchable or anything like that. So just inactive is fine. And now I can run the screen. And because the APIs are auto-generated, I didn't have to write a single line of code to create this screen. Look, it was already smart enough to color code all the rows based on the status, based on the color code for each of the statuses. So it does everything for me, right? If I want to add a status, I can come in here and I can add a status and fill in all the appropriate fields. If I want to edit this one, maybe because I want to change the color, right? So I could do that here. Now, this is a good example where this, because color is a string in the database, it thinks this is a string field instead of a color picker, right? So let's go look at my screen. I'm going to click on this action button. So this is a generated screen, how they work. I'm going to click on that. I'm going to go to properties. I'm going to scroll down, and you'll see under action steps, you have a form, followed by a mutation, followed by a transformation. We've talked about this. The form collects the data. The mutation creates the data, right? And then the transformation probably refreshes the table. So after I create, I clicked on the create action. So after I create that new status, inventory status, then I want to reload the table so that the new status shows up for me, right? That's what this transformation is going to do. It's exactly what it's doing. So it's saying, look at all the components on the screen, find the thing called table 1, and then run a function on that table, and I want to do a search. So basically, it's doing the same thing the search button is doing for the table. So it says table 1. So if I click on this table, you'll see that it says table 1. So I know that that component is called table 1. So if I go click on the edit, it's going to be very similar. Now, there's also some additional stuff in here, like this disabled transformation, right? So what this is saying is, look at table 1, all the selected rows. If it's not equal to 1, because I can only edit one row at a time. So if I select multiple rows, the button's disabled. If I select 0 rows, the button's disabled. So it's going to do a count of all the selected rows, and then the button is disabled. Pretty straightforward, but that's how you can configure the application very easily. So in typical, cloud-based multi-tenant solutions, you have a feature that you can enable or disable, and there's no additional flexibility around that, right? Like I could literally come in here and I could add another transform here, and it could be anything I want, right? I could run, let's see. So if I do maybe an integration, right? So you could do an integrate, and you could call an API that goes out and checks to see, I don't know, what day of the week it is, or what the weather is, what the latest Twitter post is from, your favorite person. And based on that information, disable the button. You can get literally that carried away here with the screen design. So, and again, everything is going to help you. It's going to prompt you through these code editors, right? Control space is going to give you all the list of functions. So, here's all the components. So I didn't even have to think about that, right? So I could come in here and go component dot, okay, a table one. That's right. That's the thing I want to do. And I want to load, search, select certain rows, just select one row. So there's a lot that you can do in here. Count array. I'm not going to go through all these. There's more information on these. If you can go to community.fuse.com and search for JSONATA, and it will bring up a list of all the JSONATA bindings with descriptions and samples and things like that you can play with. Right. So they'll usually pop these things in here. I just picked the acknowledge EDI binding, and it gave me all the example data that then I can just change and fill in myself. Easy peasy. So the edit form, what I said was the color input is a string because that's the way it's defined in the data model, but I really want to have a picker. I want to have a color picker. I want to get the color wheel, right, and all that. So I'm going to go to the form element here, action. You'll see it says update inventory status and component.table1.selectedRow.name. So it makes sense, right? When I select a row and the button is active, if I deselect the row, the button's disabled. So that's that transform. If I select hold and inactive, I can't, right? Because there's something else here. If I look at the table and we go down to behavior, so let's change this to multiple, right? So maybe there's a situation where I want to be able to select multiple rows in my table, multiple work centers, and do a mass update on those. By the way, that type of feature you'd have to build out. You'd have to write a mutation to do a mass update in that sense. But let's say I want to be able to select multiple rows. So I just change that. I hit save. I go back to my screen. Button is disabled. It's enabled. And now I've selected multiple rows and it's disabled, right? And that's because of this transform here, right? It's not equal to 1, then it won't be enabled. So now I could go back to my table and say, well, that's kind of silly. I don't want to let my end user pick multiple rows because there's no point in that. So you can go through the table. You can show the tool panels, which are the things that we've looked at before, where you can drag columns, you can group, you can do the aggregations. Do I want to show the status bar, which is the bar along the bottom that shows the total? It'll also give you some, summaries, mins, max, averages, and things like that of the data you've selected. You can turn that on and off. Do you want to enable grouping? So if you show tool panels, you can still turn off grouping. You can also turn on and off the charts. The column menu, which I'll show you here briefly. Do you want to disable the end user from dragging? So this is helpful for anything that's going to be visible to the shop floor. If it's a control panel, a dispatch list, something like that, generally we will disable dragging to reorder and dragging to hide columns, because you don't want a guy on the shop floor to accidentally click and move a column off the screen and then it's gone, and then they get confused. They think they broke something. You can enable row dragging. So if you're building a dispatch list and you need to sequence jobs, or you want to sequence picks or whatever it is, just turn row dragging on. And then you have various options you can select from once you enable that. And then master detail view would let you embed a detail form, another table, whatever you want. And you can go multiple levels deep with the master detail view. So if you're looking at something like product and bill of material, you could have product as the master and bill of material as the detail. And then you select the product row, it'll expand and give you the bill of materials. So a lot of things there you can do. You can build views here by default. So if you wanted to create a view, which we looked at before, we created a view using the toolbar on the side, but you can do that here programmatically as well. And then if you want to run some type of transform on the table, so there's a table level transform, which will get all the data back from the API, and it will run a transform on all of that data before it loads it into the table. You can also do that just in the table on a specific column. It's not as performant. And we generally recommend doing transform at the table level or at the form level or at the card level rather than on a column, because then it's going to run that transform a bazillion times, and then it can feel like the application is slow. It's really just that we're using your computer to do all of this processing. So just think about that when you're building out your application. Data change. So what do I want to happen? So the data change indicator is a little pop-up that'll come up in the corner of my screen. If someone else creates a new, in this particular case, a new status, they're on their own computer, they're using the same screen, they create a new status, I'll be alerted that the data has changed, right? What I'm looking at in my table is now outdated, and it'll alert me. I can disable that alert. I can leave it enabled, and if I leave it enabled, what do I want the behavior to be if I click on that? Do I want to just refresh the screen, or do I want to open a new tab? So it'll take the same screen, pop a new tab, load it, and then I can see the new data. So all of these options, there's a lot of stuff to go through here. We will not go through every single feature or function, but what I want to do is back to the edit. I keep getting off track here. The form. So we talked about the title, right? So you can combine, text and transforms and all kinds of good stuff. So active, see, it's a checkbox, right? So remember I said when you're creating or editing data, typically you want to drive the user towards picking one or the other, not leaving it open-ended. So I'm going to change this to switch. Make this a switch. I just happen to know that you'll learn what this terminology is, right? Maybe I want to do the same for consigned. And also, what I don't see here is a default value, right? So maybe I want active to be true by default, right? So I can set a default value here. I'm going to go down. We want to go down to the color, and I want to change the color. So like usable is another one. You probably do not want a checkbox. My personal preference is I would always use a switch on a form, and I would always use a checkbox on a filter. That's what I would do. So we'll do color and type of color. We'll see if that works. I'm pretty sure that's right, but if I make a mistake, I can go to the community and look and see what the proper thing is there. And I'm going to show you the difference between an auto-generated form, which is what we're looking at here, and one that we create in just a few minutes. Just want to get through these basics. So I'll go ahead and save that. It's going to update, right? I get the good green bar. Go back to my screen. Let's pick hold and let's see what happens. Okay, so perfect. I was hoping I wouldn't get an error, and I didn't. So here's my hold. Remember, we changed active to a switch, right? So now the user has to pick either true or false, whereas a checkbox, has the hash, right? So that's not really good, especially when you're trying to build business logic around something. You generally want to make sure that a Boolean is true or false. But when you're filtering data and you're building a report, you might want everything, whether it's true or false, right? So that's where you would use the checkbox. So anyway, just my personal preference. Now color, remember I changed that to a color picker. So now you see the little color icon here. And if I click here, I'll get my color wheel, right? So I could change, all these attributes of the color, and save that, and let's see what happens now, because I've done no code so far. So let's see if I can make it, change the color to gray. Okay, so it's orange-ish. We changed it to kind of this purple brown color. Go ahead and do that. It just ran the transform to reload the data, and you can see now that my row is that green, it's that brown purplish color, right? So I went to the template. I said create a table. I picked a data model. I checked some fields. I hit OK. I gave it a name. I saved it. I clicked the little run screen button here. I went in here. I didn't like the form. I wanted to have a color input. I changed the switch. I did all that in a few seconds. That's just very simplistic. Again, this is like me approaching this as I'm an administrator and I just need a quick way to manipulate this data. I could use, again, the API Explorer and write a mutation, but this is another way for me to get around that. So this gives you some foundation, some basics for what we're going to look at next. which is my work center management. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to open a screen. We're going to go to, I'll show you two screens. There's so many. Give it a quick second to generate. So we're going to pick Work Center. You'll see there's Work Center Management and Work Center Management V2. So let's look at the original Work Center Management. A lot of versions. Go ahead and open that. So then we get our screen. See, it's much different than the one we auto-generated because I've tweaked this quite a bit over time. So I moved the filter to the left-hand side of my screen over here. So this is in a form. It's called Form 1. I have my search and I have my create. Notice I don't have an edit or delete here. Personally, I try to get rid of the delete and push users into activating or inactivating the data instead. Generally speaking, if you have a delete, that's great. However, recursively deleting data is very dangerous, and I just feel like don't even let the users do it. And if you're not recursively deleting data, like for example, if you deleted a work center and you recursively delete all the data, that means you're deleting everything. The work orders that link to it, I mean, everything is gone. You'll get rid of all of that integrity, all of that genealogy, traceability. So generally, best practices, don't delete anything unless you absolutely have to. As an admin, if you want to create some separate screens for yourself, like we just did with the delete option, for like testing or whatever, if you just, somebody makes a boo-boo, you want to go in, delete, so that's what I would do. But as far as the screens that I actually make user accessible, I generally don't include a delete. I just give them the ability to inactivate it instead. So that way I don't have to worry about errors. I don't have to worry about recursive, delete, losing history, etc. So my filter form over here on the left has various filters. So let's take a look at the select input. So how do I build a select input? So I'm going to scroll down my elements over here. I'm going to look for select, right? So a select is going to be a drop-down list. Drop-down list must be populated from another table in the system. And generally that table needs to be linked to the main data set that we're querying here, right? So if I click on the table in the middle, it's called table 1, right? So every screen is going to have its own system names for everything. So you notice the other screen I had was table 1, form 1 as well, because there was only one of each. If I add another table to this screen, it'd just be table 2, then 3, then 4, and so on. And if I go to a completely different screen, it may also have a table 1. So it's not unique across the entire system. It's just unique to this one screen, right? So that's just something to get used to there. Table 1 uses form 1 as its filter, right? So that's just configurable. So I can have multiple tables and multiple filters all on one screen and just make sure I link them together. Table 1 is using the work center data model. That's what I want. I've added these additional query fields. So these go beyond the layer of just the work center. So I wanted to pull some additional information in here, like some control panel information for whatever reason, right? I could pull in, work order processes. We went through that API Explorer. So that entire trail that we went down, you could add additional query fields here and then be able to either show that information or use that data to do some type of calculation or warning or whatever the case is. So you have the ability to just add additional query fields. You don't have to write an API. You don't have to write a query. You just have to know where the data is at. And if you're not sure where the data is at, then the place to go is that API Explorer, where you can get to the data and then you can take that anywhere that you have the curly brackets in the API Explorer, you just replace with a dot. So it's pretty straightforward. So let's look. I have auto load turned off. So what auto load will do is when you initially get to the screen, do I want the table to automatically load the data based on the filter? This table has no filter, so it's going to load everything. It's actually using the filter form on the left-hand side. So I have a few things I can do here if I want to get really fancy. I can default these values in the filter form. So this one, for example, active. Let's say I wanted to default this to true, which I did. And maybe I wanted to default my facility. Maybe I have multiple facilities, but my plan is to create a work center management screen for each facility separately. So that way, maybe I've got a different plant manager or different production manager, and I just want them to have a dedicated screen. I don't want them to come in here and have to pick the facility, maybe make a mistake, or, you know, create a new work center and maybe assign it to the wrong facility or whatever. So certainly you could do that. I could create this. I can do save a copy as, you know, Detroit plant work centers, right? Ohio plant work centers, whatever I want. And then I can default these values. I could write a default value statement in here and go, you know, ID. Remember, that's going to be a setup table. So maybe my ID is going to be, you know, Detroit, right? And then I know that there's a name there too that I would want to display also of Detroit. So now that'll be the default value for that. So I can save the screen. It can be just the Detroit Work Center Management. I can have active set to by default to be true. And then since I'm going to have this be specific to that facility, I'd probably just hide that select input. There's no reason to even show that on the screen if I'm going to save the screen as a specific name for a very specific use case. So I can hide that input. Now I know there is no Detroit facility, so that would just give me an error, but you get the idea. So the select input, let's say we want to add a new one. So I dragged this out. So I want to add a brand new select input. Let's see what I want to, maybe I want to see, I already have shift group here. We have facility. Maybe I want to search and I want to get, so when you create an outside processor in Fuse, it also creates a work center. You cannot create a work center to represent an outside processor. You must create a supplier of outside processor type, which behind the scenes, it's one of those mutations that does multiple things. Behind the scenes, it creates a work center so you can associate that outside processor to your product, right? And it also creates a facility so that when you go to ship product to that outside processor, we can track the location of that product, where it's at. So, but let's say I want to search by supplier. So I pick that and I'm going to say, because that's a string, it's probably going to be in the list. Maybe I want to make it a multi-select. So if it's a multi-select, I would say, you know, in the given list of things, I'm going to give you one or more things to look for. Down here, this will be the, so this is defining what data do I want to actually show in this drop-down list, right? So I want to show the supplier and I want to, so what do you want the user to see? I want them to see the code. When they click on it, I want to see the code. You could add other things in here too, and then it'll just show columns in the drop-down. So you could add name. We'll add name just so we see it. Order those ascending. Maybe I want to do, 15 before they have to click a button to see more. Dialog mode. So dialog mode will pop up a screen with advanced filters, basically. So you might want to do that if a select input has access to a lot of data like inventory or work orders or products or something like that, where someone may not know exactly what they're trying to find. So having that dialog mode where you can do an advanced search and you have more filters to look at could be helpful. I'm not going to turn that on. I want to allow a multi-select. Do you want to allow them to select all? In this case, probably not. So that's up to you. You can make filters required. Doesn't really make sense to make a filter unique, but because we share these components between filters and forms, you'll see there's some overlap. It doesn't need to be disabled. And then here I'm going to want to fix this up because my target data path for my query is going to be the supplier ID, right? So I want to add ID there. And now down here, additional fields. So here's a couple of things I would recommend in this particular use case, because I happen to know that the only suppliers that I want to see are ones that are outside processors and that are active, right? Well, this is a filter, so let's not include, we won't worry about active, but we definitely just want outside processors. Now down here, I can either build a rule and apply a filter to that input, or I can write it out if I happen to know JSON. So I'm going to build a rule because I like this better. I am going to say, so the reason why I selected supplier type and outside processor is because I want that piece of data to be fetched from the query for that select input. So when the user clicks on it, it's going to run the query, it's going to get the results. And I want in that result set, I want it to have whether or not it's an outside processor, because I'm going to use that to then filter the data out that I show the user, right? So down here, I'm going to go to supplier type. Hang on, supplier, doing something wrong. Oh, supplier type. And in supplier type, I want outside processor to be true, right? So it knows this is a predicate builder. So what this is saying is that when it runs the query, when the user clicks on the select input, it's going to send the GraphQL query to the back end of the system, and it's going to only return to me a list of suppliers where the supplier type is outside processor. Pretty basic. Now you can do variable filters here. So if you click on the little code icon, you'll see the JSON. So this value could be a value from some other component on the screen. And we'll do this. We'll show you this in Workcenter Management v2. So you could go $components dot, table one dot selected rows dot ID or dot something, right? And then when you select a row from the table, that value would get passed into that query. So you'd only get, some other result set, right? So maybe not applicable to this one specifically, but that's kind of how you would do that. Because this is just evaluating a straight up true false, I'm not going to worry about advanced. If I were actually pulling data from somewhere else on the screen or from within the application, I would take whatever the path is there from that, and I would add that to the context in the advanced section. It just makes it much more reliable to do that. That's the way I do it. So we just added a supplier input. It's going to filter on outside processors. And I think everything else looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and save this version. I won't deploy it because we're no longer using this version of the screen. Run it, and we'll see what that. So we're going to take a look now at what we just did. We added the supplier select input here. Drop this down. You'll see that we have about five lists here. We are filtering by outside processor suppliers here. So that's why we're only seeing that many. If I do a wide open search, it's going to look for all the active ones. We'll go ahead and do that. It's going to bring back, there's 28 Workcenters in here currently. So let's see what happens. Now, if I use this brand new filter we just added, go DK Codings, boom. Right. So we added the filter, we put some parameters on it. We filtered it down based on just those types to make it real usable for the end user. So we have the code and the name. If I go back to that supplier select input and I scroll down here to the data section, we have code and name. Maybe I want to add the active. I don't know if that would help, but we'll do it. So now I can go back, supplier. So now I have the code, active, and the name. So very easy to do, right? No code, drag and drop, point and click, less than minutes. Go ahead and search this. So we have all of our columns here. We have, we can sort based on some columns. That's a feature you can enable and disable based on the column. Like image, you can't do, but you can do code. We can, I can't drag these. I can't move them around, right? Because of the way I've defined the table, I disabled dragging. and I disabled this. And let's show the column menu so you can see what the column menu is. So a couple different levels of filtering here as well in this screen that I'm designing is I have on the left-hand side is my form filter. The form filter is used by the API to return the results to the screen based on these inputs, right? So that's back end. If I have 10 bazillion work centers in my system, this set of filters is going to limit or reduce how many actually, show up in this table, right? So if I say, show me all of the inactive, there's 3. If I say, show me all of the active, there's 28. If I say, show me both, there's 31, right? Makes sense. Simple math. All my active ones. So, that's how you can add filters here. Now we turned on the column menu. So if I go to something like, let's say facility area, let's say I was fine with the filters I used here, but now I want to filter this down a little bit more, just like you could do in Excel, where you could go across the top and you can filter on any of those columns, right, in Excel. So now I'll have this little icon, and if you click here, now you'll see that there's a filter tab. So I can go, DK coatings, perfect. So I just want my DK coatings, right? Let me get rid of that, and I would deselect all and do that. So this is not filtering or querying through the back end of the system. This is literally just filtering the data that I have right here in the table, right? So there's multiple avenues to creating reports and dashboards and whatever you want. There's, no holds barred here. So what else can we do? We could pin this column to the left. I can auto size all columns, right? That'll auto size everything for me. Just again, very similar to Excel. If I select everything in that column and maybe I want to copy, and I'm going to get an Excel sheet, and now I want to paste. Boom. See how easy that is to get data out of Fuse. Can't do that in any other system, folks. I can also highlight a range and copy. Do I want to copy with headers? Okay, let's see what that does. Let's go ahead and boom. So now I've got everything I just selected in that range, right? So this actions, because it's got a button, so it doesn't know what to do with the button, but everything else copied right in with my headers. So very easy for your end users to get data out of the system, build reports, whatever. We generated this screen in less than a minute, and it's already extremely usable. So let me remove the pin. You can see down here I have the summary bar on. So if I click on the the status bar, so that's the bar across the bottom. So it tells me how many rows. It tells me, the average, the count, the min, the max, the sum. It just depends on what range of data I've selected, right? So it's looking at this this column here, basically for the max and the min. The count is how many I currently have highlighted, right? So if I do that, I have 3. If I do this, I have 3, and my min and max is 1. So just like in Excel, everything is basically the same. So what's different about this from the auto-generated screen is a few things. Obviously the layout, and I'll talk more about the layout in the next recording. But we have the search, we have the filter over here on the left, I have the table on the right, I have this collapsible panel so I can get more of the table view if I need to. We've turned on and off these column filters. I can show columns, remove columns if I want. All of that here. I can also turn on the tool panel, save that. That'll enable the tool panel over here on the right hand side. So I could do the same thing. I could turn columns on and off. I can rearrange columns here and save those views. So all very simple, easy, self-explanatory there. The other thing I've added here is an action column. And in the action column, you'll see there's 2 actions. One is to view the work center details. So we can click that. It's going to open a new screen. It's taking me to a completely different screen that we've designed. I can tell that this is obviously outdated. Let's see if that is correct. Nope. So I think that I've already disabled that screen. So something to keep in mind here, and I'm going to show you a new iteration of this Work Center Management V2 where we've addressed that particular situation. Edit is just going to pop up a form. So I've changed this form where these are no longer inputs, they're just display fields. Okay, so all these other fields here are, editable, and I could save that. So that's pretty typical. And then I have the ability to create a new work center here. And notice the inputs are different. So I can have a different create form than I have edit. So in edit mode, these are static. I can't edit them. But I also have custom data and integration data down here at the bottom, which I did not have when I did the create, right? So these forms can be completely different, tailorable, however you want to do those. So this is a pretty simple one. Let's take a look at next generation Work Center Management. We will open Work Center Management V2. It's on version 0.3. Kind of similar. Let's go ahead and run this screen so we can see what that looks like for the end user. So there's no longer a collapsible panel here. Some feedback was that it wasn't really helpful. So if it's not helpful, get rid of it. Got search, change the buttons around, the styling of the buttons. We added a couple more filters over here. You'll notice that by default, we have no column filters, but we do have the bar over here on the side, right, which we didn't previously. And we also have in the actions column a different action. So when I click this action, I get the form popping up over here. So this allows me to edit this work center, and I can also view the work center history, right? Some where used, some production runs. So if I look at my assembly cell, we'll see how the assembly cell works out here. So assembly cell, we'll go to history. So this is all the work center history for the assembly cell, where used. So this is a list of all of the products that are run on the assembly cell. And then if there's any production runs, which I know there are a couple out there. So totally different way to design the screen. I've got a button here to get rid of that. We also have done this so that I can edit assembly cell, but I can also click on 3D printer, right? So I can, just very quickly edit these different things rather than launching a whole new page or even having a pop-up. This is all done in a single screen now rather than multiple screens. Remember when I clicked on that edit button and it tried to launch a new tab, it was trying to look for another screen, which I know I've already inactivated, which is why nothing came up. But this is all done in a single screen design, which is another way to do it. And if we look at this, we have the filter form, we have the table. And if I scroll, you see I've got this big scroll bar here at the bottom. If I scroll over to the right, we are going to see that form. So how did I do that? This form is in a container called Work Center Form Container. I named it myself because you can do that. You can click on properties and you can change the system name to whatever you want. I built the form out and I added some additional query fields here to help me drive some behavior of the form. So for example, the code is either a fixed value that you can't edit if you're viewing an existing work center, or if you're going into this form to create a new work center, then you have the input code here. So if we take a look at this input and we scroll down, you'll see that it's only visible if there's no ID. And there would be no ID if you're creating a new work center. Now, if we click on this guy, we will see that he is not visible if he is visible if there is an ID, right? So it's kind of the reverse. So in one case, if there is an ID, that means I'm editing. So I'm going to display it that way. If there's no ID, I'm creating. So I display the other field. Pretty straightforward. there, all of these fields reference. Now, we talked a little bit about that API Explorer and how we can do mutations and upserts and all of that. So if you look at the bottom of the form, there's a create and add, right? So if I'm in a situation where I want to create multiple work centers, one after the other, because I just want to get the data in the system. So I can create one, hit this button, it refreshes the form, and I can just add the next one right away. How did I do that? Let's take a look. So on that action button, we have our mutation, which takes all of the data that was entered in the form, right? And I'm doing an upsert. So it's going to create or update based on whether or not there's an ID in the form or not. So that's, pretty simple. We can open this up. So what I've done is I've listed out every field in the form, and I've listed a reference to the input on the form where I want that data to come from. And in some cases, I've listed the input on the form where I want the data to come from, but I coalesce. So if that field happens to be empty, the user doesn't fill it in, I'm going to default it to 1, right? And some of these here you'll see like, a Boolean, where if the user doesn't set it, I'm going to set it to true. So I can build in some of this to the front end to make sure that the business logic and the behavior downstream isn't impacted by something that maybe a user forgets to do or doesn't do correctly, right? And if I'm creating data, then it's obviously going to be active, right? If I am updating data, then my active is probably not going to be true. It'll be whatever the input is. But in this case, this button that I've created only allows me to create and then make a new one. But what I'm going to do is go data.active. So that way it doesn't matter if what we're doing there, that'll fix a potential bug. So we just fixed a potential bug there. Let's go look at the other action button, which is save, right? So the save action is you can only do when you're editing an existing work center, right? So it's disabled if we're creating a new work center.